Okay, so I think that we're slowing down as far as people joining in. So we're 3 minutes past the hour. I think I'll turn it over to Barb now. We are recording, and for this webinar, we will record for the entirety of the webinar, just to give you a heads up. And with that, over to you, Barb.
Thank you, Annetta. Fantastic. So yes, the weather has been the theme of the webinar so far, but we're going to go beyond that. We're going to have a theme of new knowledge development this time round. So Annetta will move on to the next slide. So the theme today is new knowledge development. And, you know, this is such a unique I mean, this isn't new, I'm sure, for all of you, but I want to reinforce it is really a unique aspect of the Mental Health Promotion Innovation Fund. I mean, I was very briefly, I was recently interviewed by a consultant who's helping the Public Health Agency to figure out what different models are for knowledge hubs. And something that was really unique for our hub, as in our collectively for the MHP-IF, is that we have this focus on new knowledge development. And some of the models that we're, you know, experimenting with you to, you know, help bring some new knowledge into the field was pretty darn exciting for them to hear. So I just want to share that with you because I think, you know, not all of us have a lot of exposure to different knowledge hubs that are active out there. So for today, we've got two parts. That's sort of becoming the usual thing. The two parts, the first part is, again, new knowledge development and two studies that, that we'll share with you. One being familiar, just to keep the conversation going about the pandemic adaptations study. And then the second one is one that is not familiar to you yet, but I'd like to give just a really brief overview and what to expect next on that. Part two of the webinar is use of storytelling methods. So this is where there's more of a focus on the project sharing and discussions. The link between the two parts is that storytelling is actually the main methodology that we're envisioning for the pandemic adaptation study, as we've shared with you. And storytelling, of course, can be used for many different things. I mean, for social change, different engagement practices. And so there are a couple of projects that agreed to share some of their uses of storytelling, just to open that conversation a little bit. And then we'll finish strong with a poll at the very end. So that's the deal for today. So part one is just describing very briefly and you know, pausing for any questions or comments you might have about these, is just to talk a little bit the two studies that are being planned. So with the pandemic adaptation study, so I'm seeing that my internet is too wonky. I will call back in, but I'll just keep going. Annetta, maybe you can cue me if I need to call back in, okay? Okay. So brief point about the value. I mean, all of us jointly came to the topic of this study together because of the value within the MHP-IF. It's been kind of interesting, the value that, you know, the Public Health Agency, for example, is super excited about this. You know, the international interest that there is in basically, you know, what the changing conditions of the pandemic mean for child and youth mental health promotion in particular. And, you know, what are short-term changes? What are maybe some of the long-term changes that really shape the whole development of the field? So there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of value, I think, that can come from this. So most of you, I mean, a very large majority expressed interest in at least you know, participating in sharing some of your stories. So I do want to say a huge thank you to you. And so it was an easy yes to, you know, continue on with some of the development for this study. And, you know, the other thing that, again, that you would have seen come into your email inboxes is just, again, optional to use, but we offered up some wording that you could use in your 1-year pandemic extension work plans that relate to the study, just to make it, you know, embed it right into those work plans, and the Public Health Agency is very aware of that as well. So the next thing that will be underway are I couldn't resist the oh my, the design, the methods and ethics, oh my, with an emphasis on the storytelling methodology. So that's stuff that's underway, and as we express to all of you, there is an opportunity for, you know, to develop this in a collaborative way for those of you who want to be part of that. And the Hub is very happy to try to make this as practical and as feasible for anyone who wants to participate. So there's always that delicate balance of, you know, we want to ensure there's good, credible findings and a good approach. We also want to make sure it's very practical and feasible to participate. So, so on that study, I just want to, you know, pause briefly and see whether, in fact, anybody has any questions or comments. I mean, this isn't new stuff, but we wanted to loop back just to make sure you knew this is still on the radar, and you know, following most or all of you that did, you know, express some interest in being part of this. So I'm just going to pause and see if there are any questions or comments on this study that come in through chat, or unmuting yourselves to share with the group verbally. There are actually some findings that are coming out. I haven't had a chance to review them, but some of the sort of rapid response or rapid studies that have happened on pandemic adaptations, not too many on child and youth mental health promotion, but that's something that we'll actually pay attention to and help to position this study and inform the focus of this. So it's actually, you know, new, sort of a new angle, and really brings to life the diverse experience in the child and youth mental health promotion. Awesome. Okay, I know you just want to get on to the storytelling as well. So you know what? I'm just going to give a brief thumbnail sketch on the second study, and this is the one that's new to you. And this is all of you, you know, through your orientation with the Hub and everything you've seen on the website, you know that one of our main functions, one of our main roles is to actually help make connections. And that includes, and you know, the first priority is any connections within the MHP-IF community itself. So all of the discussions about learning with and from each other and so on, this is all about making connections within the MHP-IF. And so one of the studies that we have, our plans are underway, and in fact, we've submitted an ethics application for this already. It's under ethics review, is to begin to describe and understand this MHP-IF project community. And I do want to say at the outset, like this is really sort of, again, very sort of practical, feasible, etc. But I want to make sure that you're aware of, you know, sort of the next steps that are going to be taken with this. So, I mean, it is a study that there's a lot to learn in the field about how do you create these different sort of communities of shared interests. There's the MHP-IF, there's others across the country who share interests with you. And so there is a scientific contribution there. Very practically, and I'd say the practical contributions are most important for this one. It's to inform projects, mostly the hub and the public health agency in informing what we do over time. And the public health agency, how is phase 2 of the MHP-IF going to look? And so they're really looking for some of the findings from this study as well. There's, and you know, one of the things that I think is important to acknowledge about this too is that these are, you know, the MHP-IF project community. It's one that we're all part of because of being successful within the MHP-IF. Part of that reality is a combination of, you know, ways in which we can really learn with and from each other, and that's very cooperative. Another part of this is that many of you have acknowledged is there's an aspect of competition between projects too, when we think about when we think about future phases. So all of these things feed into what does it mean to be a project community, and how do you best, you know, sort of capitalize on the advantages and minimize any of the risks or possible downsides in being part of a community. So again, high value, the two components, a very short, oh my gosh, this survey, it redefines short, like it's very short, an online survey that we're hoping to launch in the summer, and then follow-up focus groups in the fall. And, you know, the focus in this current fiscal year is really about getting a handle on what are your hopes, what are your wishes. It's not about sort of evaluating what's happened so far as much as, you know, what are you really hoping to get from this community, and how can we best help support that? And so, you know, the value and benefits that you're hoping for, that's the real focus of the online survey, and will be explored in a little bit more detail in the focus groups. As everything with the hub, all these things are optional. There's no mandatory sort of participation in this stuff, but we will definitely keep you informed and make sure that we do our job in helping to position how this might add value, right? And what it might mean to participate. So what's next on this? I mean, the hub will be sharing a brief description of the study with you. And for each of the project leads, we will be asking people to basically share the names of members of your project team who you think should be included in this. And the people who need to be included are those who have some role and have who you see interacting as part of this MHP-IF project community. There are many members of your project teams that, you know, will interact with other project team members, but won't necessarily participate in webinars, be part of anything that's sort of across projects. So each of you is in the best position to help identify who those people might be. So just wanted to give that sort of overview of you know, something that's on the horizon. And so it's in that spirit of no surprises, and you know, when you receive a next step about thinking about who might be invited to participate in the survey. So I think that's about it for an overview. Gonna pause here for just any questions or comments or feedback or anything that's on your minds. I've purposely kept those overviews very, very brief. And before moving into the storytelling as the main event today. So any comments? I'm scanning through for any unmuting, looking at the chat.
Dave here with a quick question. When you are talking about the focus groups in the fall, have you thought about how that's going to work? Are you going to do small groups? Is it going to be like one organization at a time, or just
Excellent
kind of
question,
wondering what
Dave.
the process is.
Yeah, Dave, excellent. So what's in the ethics protocol right now is that of course they're going to be virtual, right? So that's point one. And we've got lots of experience in doing the virtual focus groups. Another part of the sort of protocol is that they would be organized. It would be multiple projects in each focus group. But the people who would be invited to different focus groups, they'll be organized by sort of similar roles within projects. So those who primarily have like a focus on evaluation, monitoring, research, they'll come together as a group. And then project leads as a group. I mean, part of our thinking around that, again, it's all methodological decisions, but the willingness to participate, the sort of peer groups within the project. So that's the current design. And another thing to note there is that the projects and the individuals will be completely anonymous to the hub and to the public health agency. Like, that's really important because these are findings to inform what we're going to do. And you know, the individuals who will actually facilitate the focus groups, they're going to be very hub informed, but they're not going to be members of the secretariat. We want to make sure that anonymity is respected and protected there. Not needed for the survey, and you'll see why when it's more about the value, the benefits for people. So, but with those focus groups for the honest and open sharing about how things rolled so far, and input to say the public health agency on next phases, projects and individuals to be completely anonymous.
I'm Mahmoud from Winnipeg. Will you go through the same ethics process for the storytelling project too on adaptation experiences? Absolutely.
That's an absolute, for us, it's an absolute given. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And for the storytelling, like, who are you expecting to participate from a particular agency?
So that's a great question. So that protocol, we've not yet developed for it. So in fact, one member of the Hub Resource Collaborative that is on this call, you might have seen her, hello. Her name is Andrea she's currently based in Auckland, New Zealand. She has quite a bit of expertise in use of storytelling, particularly for these kinds of research purposes. She's actually going to be a member of the team that is helping to design some of this. So we're actually just moving into the design phase of that. So no answers at this point, but part of the purpose today is to start that sharing of, from a project perspective, the kind of use of storytelling, how that's gone, and that can inform some of how we consider the storytelling methods for the pandemic adaptation study.
Thank you, Barb.
Sound okay?
Yep.
All right. Okay. So with that, I think we'll move on, Annetta, to the next slide. So that's sort of the segue. I mean, the storytelling is, yes, it can be a research tool, lots of other purposes as well, like social change, engagement, etc. And, all different projects have experience with this. And as I mentioned, more than one actually member of the Hub Resource Collaborative have experience in this area as well. And as I mentioned, Dr. Andrea Lamar, we're delighted, Andrea, that you're on the call today. She's so let's see, protective of her video. I mean, it's 7:00 a.m. in New Zealand. So she says, well, Barb, I'll join, but not if I have to show my video. I said, all right then. I mean, she looks lovely at any time of the day, but anyway, Welcome, Andrea. Voice alone, but
Thanks,
she's
Barb.
really keen. Yeah, so she's really keen just to listen, to what you have to share as projects, and then very open to contributing to the discussion as appropriate. Okay, so I just wanted to introduce her and her name because Andrea would be would be new to you. Thanks, Andrea. Always a smiley face. I love it. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Annetta to basically facilitate part 2 of the webinar.
Yes, thanks very much. So as Barb cued, 2 project teams very kindly agreed to just kick off our discussion today with their experiences with storytelling methodologies. So we'll start with SCC, the Authentic Social Identity and Mental Health Project. And then we'll hear from the Celebrating Culture, Celebrating Life project, and that's the MHP-IF project. So from SCC, I think that there's 3 of you on the call today, so I wasn't sure if it's going to be a team effort or if one of you wanted to take the lead. Go ahead.
I was really hoping for a team effort, but I'll start. And then
I'm
Dave,
very open to a team effort. If that's the path we want to take, I'm very open to that as well.
Oh,
All at once.
Joey, you're gonna be in on the SCC stuff too. That's great. Yeah, however you want to split it up.
Just to make the 3 minutes go by a little quicker.
awesome. Okay, I'll start, and then folks can jump in. So the Students' Commission of Canada, we actually have a program evaluation and research platform called Sharing the Stories. And Sharing the Stories has a huge suite of tools, both quantitative and qualitative tools. And we use those tools to gather and amplify young people's voices, usually in the context of youth programming. Sometimes we also work in sort of broader community contexts. Say we've done a lot of work in the city of Kingston in Ontario, where we did some broader data collection with the community to identify how to make Kingston a more youth-friendly city. So we gather these stories in lots of different contexts. We have ethics clearance through the Queen's General Research Ethics Board. And one of the things that we've actually been able to do through that is open the door to some new ways of gathering stories from young people. So while we do have paper surveys and paper, both quantitative and qualitative, and we do data collection in person when it's allowed, when it's appropriate, or on the phone, interviews and focus groups, we've also actually opened up to using text messaging and social media to gather young people's stories, because in particular in this time of pandemic, that's how we're doing a lot of our communication. There's a lot of texting and there's a lot of direct messaging going on. So that has become one of our options that we are starting to employ to gather these stories. And we both sort of have the option to tell an individual story. So if either the story of a young person in particular, or the story of a particular organization and one of their programs, or we can tell a much larger collective story. We have, I believe, and Stony can correct me, I think 16,000 individual users who have used our Sharing the Stories program evaluation and research platform. So we're also in the process of starting to tell more of those larger collective stories about the impacts of different kinds of programs with different kinds of populations. And I'll leave it at that and see if Dave or Stony or anybody has anything that they want to add.
That's pretty good, Krista. You've been working on that elevator pitch, haven't you?
I'm trying real hard.
Yeah. That was well done. I think one of the things that's most interesting for me with sharing the stories is the fact that once we've crunched the data, we go back to the youth groups and youth that we've gathered it from, and we do what's called a data party. So we play with the data, we get their interpretations of it before, you know, we spit out like a final report or kind of the final thing. So there's always this engagement with young people happening along the way. They help develop the surveys. They help develop what they want to know. We really try to incubate that curiosity piece as well, and then use that to move forward in the process as well, so that you can always kind of see the youth voice emerging throughout the process.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, Dave. I think another technique that we have been using in other projects is the kinds of stories and scenarios that we collect from interviews and from focus groups. We've been working with our academic partners to develop into scenarios that we can actually use as embedded activities in the activities that we do. So we're taking data that we've collected and turning it into activities, and then actually embedding those activities as another data collection. So it builds on the stories of young people in scenarios, and then we actually, in terms of collecting more data, we use as an embedded activity. So we're trying wherever possible to embed research and evaluation as part of the actual activities that our various sites are doing. So that is the sort of embedding of the story. So the storytelling for us has full cycle from the activity, the engagement of young people and partners in creating materials that can be used that both further the knowledge that we've gathered from previous things, and then move it forward into collecting more nuances and more input into those scenarios. And it helps us ground our activities and exploration of the topic, advancement of on that topic in the data that's already been gathered, and the stories of young people really involved in authentic situations that speak to them.
Fantastic. And I see that, Krista, thanks very much. You shared the website URL where people can learn a little bit more about this process. So that's really fantastic. Thanks very much for that. Okay, so that's great. And I think now we'll hear from Joey. And I'm sorry, I think I said the acronym wrong previously. It's MCHB. I think I always want to say MHP. So,
and then I get it wrong more times than I'd like to admit, so don't even worry about it. So actually a lot there that I think is very similar to sort of how we use storytelling, and some of the really powerful methods in which it can really inform some of the work that you're doing. Stony, especially towards the end, you talked a little bit about something that we call like a feedback loop, which I'll get into a little bit more, which is actually very, very similar to how we use it. But I suppose when Annetta sort of said this was very informal, I took it very literally. So I just jotted a bunch of sort of talking points. I'll bounce between them, and if there's any questions, I'd love to elaborate. But basically, we've been sort of at MCHB obsessed with what we call sort of participatory research through storytelling, and we've been obsessed with it for just about as long as the organization's been around. So we have sort of two methods that we're using in this particular project. So we're either going to be using the community-led engagement groups, or the CLEGs, and those are going to be larger groups that are storytelling and sharing stories together, or we have in a more sensitive setting, the one-on-one. And the reason we do that, obviously, I think it's pretty clear. Some people aren't comfortable sharing their like very intimate stories when other people are around, and other people actually are empowered by having brothers and sisters like-minded around them. So it really just depends, and we make sure people are aware of like those two different methods, because we do tend to do the storytelling in a person-to-person setting. I actually love the idea about sort of having like an online way to broadcast it. We have been using social media because of COVID, but that's more been a necessity, like using things like WhatsApp and things like that as a necessity, rather than something that we we prefer to do. And I think I'll get into a little bit more why we do that one-on-one a little bit later. But our procedures, we have a lot of like letters and things like that to the communities. These are vulnerable communities that we're working with. So the Oromo, the Syrian, and then Eritrean, Ethiopian. These are particular communities that are actually wary about systems. And once they feel like they're being interrogated, I feel like there's a bit of a barrier brought up. So we just have some very simple letters that are translated that sort of suggest and tell them that they can pull out anytime they want. They're not forced to share any stories. And we're very, very deliberate with how we're using these stories and what we're using them for, because I think it's important to make sure that there's that trust there. And then again, why we use stories. So the ADAPT model that we use, which is sort of the foundation, it's the academic backdrop for our entire project. It's called the ADAPT, but it's adaptation development after persecution and trauma. And it keys in on 5 key psychological domains. So those are safety, attachment, bonds, identity, and justice. Those are very heavy topics, right? So we don't really want to sit people down and say, where are times where your identity has sort of been infringed on, or where are times where you felt like your sense of justice was taken from you? What we like to do is we like to train people from within those communities. So for our youth brokers, they all belong to the communities from which they work. So an Oromo broker will go up to an Oromo community or an Oromo youth group, or have a one-on-one session with an Oromo youth and say, just after they've built that trust, to say, what are some of the experiences that you've gone through? And then we'll sort of go through those experiences. We'll sort of digest those stories on our own and then look at how they relate to those 4 key domains. And going back to what sort of Stony was saying, those will inform our practice going forward. So the risk factors that come from those key domains will inform how we like to participate or how we like to carry on the research going forward. So those are some of the things that we do. How we begin is we again key in on these group of community leaders, or these people that we think are going to be able to flesh out these stories or develop those connections with the youth in terms of bringing out those stories. And then we train them in the ADAPT model with our academic partners. So we did like a 1.5 week long training, and then every week we sort of meet and sort of touch on areas here and there where we feel like we're still not completely comfortable. So it's constantly an ongoing training process for the people collecting the stories as well as us. So we're constantly learning, and it's this constant feedback loop. So I think the key part of what makes our procedure sort of successful is that I'm not the one collecting the stories, or other people as a part of the sort of admin team aren't the people collecting the stories. It's actually the people from the communities. And I think me being Kurdish, I came here when I was 6 years old. There was a lot of trauma that Kurdish people have gone through that other demographics might necessarily not understand. And it's not for lack of caring, and it's not for lack of trying. It's just a reality of sort of when you experience these very specific and very and these things that are infringing on your identity in a very specific way, you might not feel as comfortable to share it with someone that you might not perceive to understand, because so many of these youth have shared these stories in settings where they thought there was comfortability, and they've been misinterpreted, and things have been misinterpreted. So it's important that someone understands both, number one, the stories that are being shared in a very sort of natural way, but also understands that because of the trauma and sort of the persecution that some of these youth have gone through, it tends to at times express itself in ways that we might consider in Western society like problematic, or we might consider them troubled children or something like that. So it's just important to make sure that those things are very understood and very natural. So that's sort of, those were the key points I thought I'd touch on, but if there's anything else that anyone is interested in, I'd be happy to elaborate.
That was perfect, Joey. I don't know what formal is for you, but that was out of the park. Perfect. Yeah, so I think there were just a couple comments when both project teams were sharing. So Andrea was saying when SCC was sharing, that sounds really fantastic. Love the collaboration with youth, and it's very neat to hear about the iterative process where stories gathered inform future work. And Stony agreed with Joey that it's really important about kind of deciding when to encourage sharing publicly versus privately, or giving those options. Barb was saying that for the pandemic adaptations study, all of us will need to consider who is best positioned to collect the stories. And some thanks for sharing.
I just want to, one thing I do want to say is, I don't mean to say that if you don't belong to that specific culture, you can never collect stories. It's just for the practicality of us, it's a little bit easier to make sure that it's natural. But I'm sure people from other cultures could do it incredibly, but that's just the way that we do it, and that's what's worked for us in the past. So I just want to add that like caveat there.
Yeah, I think that's really valid too. When you were describing it, that makes sense, especially for youth that are coming with the traumas like you're describing, that somebody from their own community might be approaching them. And I also just want to welcome Trish to the call. She's another member of our Hub Resource Collaborative and another person with fantastic expertise in storytelling. So welcome, Trish. So yeah, I think at this point, we'll just open it up to other projects that have questions for those that have shared a little bit about their experiences with storytelling. And also if you have any of your own experiences, in terms of project work that you've done, what have been those experiences? What kinds of specific methodologies have you been using? What are perhaps factors that you think facilitate sharing or maybe are barriers? So I'll just kind of pause there and see if there's any comments from anybody on the call. If you're joining by, you can do it in chat or you can do it verbally. It's been really great to hear more of your voices today, so I also encourage that. Okay, so Chris is saying, we really like to center relationships in our work. So for my part, I'm often collecting stories with young people that I have built relationships with, which is definitely helpful in terms of comfort and safety. Yeah, that sounds really important. And I do wonder, how do you build those relationships? And are there certain things that help to build that trust? I mean, is it just a matter of spending time? Is it, kind of certain activities? Like, can anybody comment on how do you build trust?
I will say that even with us, like, just because we're from that same culture doesn't mean necessarily that the trust is inherent. So things like, I think Stoney's group is sort of talking about the actual programming. We have youth programming funded by a different project that a lot of the youth actually participate in, and a lot of the youth leaders are present in that programming and are there, and they're sort of experiencing that program with them. And then inherently through like play, through like arts and crafts, and even just through casual conversation, there's a trust that's built naturally there. And I think that's sort of, from what I'm hearing, that's sort of what sort of is happening with Krista and her group as well. There's that inherent trust that's being gradually and very carefully built. And I think that's essential to storytelling. So yeah.
Thanks, Joey.
I can share a word or two
thanks.
if that's helpful. Can you hear me well? It's Andrea.
Oh, it's Andrea. Hi, Andrea.
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much for sharing that. I really loved hearing about both of those projects. Like, I think that's really amazing work. I got really excited as I was listening because I was like, oh yeah, this really resonates with times when I've done storytelling. But I think around the piece of building trust, like, I think it is that like not rushing piece. Like, I think it's one of those things that you hear sometimes about like slow academia or slow community building. And I think we kind of rush in a lot of the work that we do. But with stories, like even just taking the time to sit with people and kind of try to understand where they're coming from is so incredibly key. And like really taking that time in development of a relationship is incredibly important. So I think it's really awesome that you're coming to this work, a lot of you, with like existing relationships with communities, or at least like certain people within those communities, because those people can also, vouch for you in certain settings. Because I think sometimes like once you become like a bit of a known entity, that can help you build those relationships out further and kind of expand out. I don't know if that's a super relevant point or if I'm just kind of rambling, but basically I'm excited and love to hear these discussions about trust and safety and story and everything. So thanks.
Thanks, Andrea. So nice to hear from you. And I think just on this topic, still with the trust, so Sony is saying we are building our approach around a model of safer spaces derived from the literature and our experience. Several years of work behind the articulation, sorry, I lost it there. It's been scrolling. Sorry, Stoney, I kind of messed that one up.
I could help you
Yeah,
behind the articulation of the model, and
There we
we'll be able to share it shortly. We've tried to tease out the various components of the model around how to build authenticity and trust and relationships and belonging, both between individuals within the group, if it's a group setting, and amongst the whole group.
Perfect.
And that's actually sort of what our whole project is about.
Thanks very much, Stoney. So a question from Lisa: how are folks preparing their teams to hear trauma stories?
So I think I'll because we have done that. So what we're doing is, number one, we're finding people that we're letting them know explicitly that this is the work that they're going to be doing, and then this is the ways in which they're going to be working, and that's the number one, and those people are sort of nominating themselves, and then we're working very diligently with our academic team as well as our some of the psychiatrists that we have in here, and some of the teams that have worked in this area in the past. And we had a rigorous training process in which we made it very apparent like what some of those stories are going to look like and how they're going to impact them. But I also do want to mention that the people that we selected have actually have worked in this field in the past. So 2 out of the 3 brokers that we selected initially were brokers in the past. They just weren't youth brokers. So they had already experienced sort of some of the stories and stuff. And then the rest had a sort of a background in that field. So we're not sort of just plucking people out of thin air, but just ensuring that there's that background there for at least sort of an idea of what's to come, sort of, and then just ensuring that there's a proper support system and then proper training to ensure that they're prepared.
Thanks for sharing that, Joey. Trish, I think you had your hand up at one point. Did you want to contribute anything?
Yes, please. Thank you. I just, I think it's kind of interesting to be talking about relationships and also about how trauma can be kind of brought into and addressed and recognized in the safe spaces that relationships can build. When I think about relationships, I'm also thinking about kind of a social consciousness. And so when we engage in relationships, and also when we start to talk to people about their important relationships and then making these connections so that those relationships become somehow placed in a context of all kinds of relationships and systems and structures, I think something really important happens, and it is a trust building moment because it's an opportunity for people not to blame themselves for some of their experiences, including their experiences of trauma. And I feel that a lot of arts-based storytelling makes room for that. In some of my work I've developed digital stories, used dance, theater, comic book development, posters, public sculptures, and all of those art projects became stories where people were sort of critically positioning themselves in their larger community. And it became very liberating work for everybody involved. And I just wanted to share that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Trish. And so interesting. Wow. So we have a couple of questions. One is from Catherine. So it says, thank you everyone for sharing your fantastic work. The use of social media sounds really innovative. As someone new to this approach, this question may be a bit technical. However, I wonder if there can be any guidance, lessons, or anything like a suggestion for navigating social media with youth, specifically about creating a safe space, managing any challenging comments, etc.
Just for us, it's not a private form. Sorry, it is a private form. So the issue of managing comments, because it's usually just direct messages from the broker to, or the youth broker to the actual youth. So that doesn't tend to be an issue. We just like to use things that are sort of have some sort of encryption process where the information is sort of staying there. But that doesn't always work. Like youth will message you on Instagram Messenger if they want. Like it's just sort of the process. You just sort of let them lead. They tend to be more familiar with that space than we are, and we're just excited that they're engaging with us in any way that they are. So we just take it for what it is and try to make it as sort of secure and safe as possible. And if there are discussions, so we've had in the past where people have tried to start discussions in like Instagram DMs or Facebook Messenger, and we've tried to take it over to at least WhatsApp, because WhatsApp does have an encryption, so that information can't be pulled by anyone else. So that's the minimum that we try to do. But other than that, it's sort of just letting them come to us however they feel they feel comfortable. Yeah.
In response to that question, I think one thing that we've noticed is the importance of having that just initial time to have conversation and not have it structured. So as people start to join the Zoom call or whatever platform it is, it's just talking about their day, talking about real informal stuff before you kind of get into an agenda. So if we have like an hour-long meeting, the first 20 minutes might just be catching up, and then maybe 10 minutes with a little bit of an activity. There's some pretty neat like online icebreakers type games that can be used, and then leaving about 5-10 minutes again at the end. So you might have an hour agenda, but really only 20 minutes to a half hour might be the actual like structured agenda time, which I think has been really important.
Thanks for that. So there was a question earlier on, I believe, from Lisa, and it sounds like Lisa is a little bit maybe more new to the storytelling approach and is wondering how this differs from psychotherapy. Would anybody like to comment on that?
I guess I'll comment on it. I feel like I'm talking way too much. I think for us, it's just easier to approach. So psychotherapy obviously is a very specific thing done in a very specific place by someone that's highly trained. This is something that I think the community, like we've done projects in the past through Dr. Yohani and the U of A and Catholic Social Services, where they've targeted actual communities to develop people within those communities that can sort of that can have the discussions using the ADAPT model in very informal settings, and actually that I think is how it differs for us. Is it becomes a very informal process that is formal in the back end, but it's very informal in the process of like taking the stories and having those conversations. So number one, I don't think we would necessarily know how to ask the questions a psychotherapist could ask, but we do try to just take it for what it is and take the stories for what they are, and sort of make it a more informal process where there is still, I think, like Trish was saying, an ability for someone to critically position themselves in their trauma and sort of explore it in that way. So I think that's how it sort of differs for us. I don't know if that was a great explanation.
Yeah, Joey, building on that, I would say that storytelling is a technique that can be used by experts in psychotherapy, but storytelling itself is a technique which also can be used in other contexts other than psychotherapy. So storytelling for us has emerged as something that's come out of our programming. So it's a technique that we use inside our programming, then might have other applications. And similarly, we would take a technique like motivational interviewing, which is used in clinical settings in a very particular way, but we have adapted that and that some of those motivational interviewing techniques to use in peer influencing programs where we're training young people to be peer influencers through motivational interviewing techniques. So I agree with Joey, a lot of it depends on knowing what your area of expertise is and when you should use and modify the techniques for the context that you're in.
I also want to just, and amazing point, Sonia. Also, Andrea made a great point that actually we talk about in our training, which is we're actually not collecting these stories specifically to help people or to provide psychological help. Of course, like if it is informing them and it is helping them, that's amazing. But actually, we say that you're actually just giving them an opportunity to express themselves. It's not necessarily specifically sitting down and saying I'm psychologically going to fix or help or do any of those things, right? So that I think that's a really important point as well.
Thanks, that was really great. And one thing that I was wondering if anybody could clarify, because I am quite new to this approach as well, is when you say that you're positioning yourself critically, what do you mean by that? Is that, I don't even know if I said that correctly.
I think, Stony, did you want to, I saw you unmute.
No, you go.
I think what it means is simply because like when you're experiencing trauma and when you've gone through trauma, I think oftentimes it just feels like you're just going through it. It's not even something that you're thinking about in terms of like critically positioning yourselves, and you might even consider yourself at fault for some of the trauma. Where when I say critically position yourself, I mean to say like really considering that trauma that you've experienced, really telling that story. And in the process of telling that story, there might be opportunities for you to realize where you are, where you fit in that trauma, and how it actually impacts you, and that it isn't actually your fault, and that it is a matter oftentimes of circumstance and things like that, rather than just thinking about it as like this awful thing that happened to me that might actually have been my fault. Really considering it in a way that's healthy and I think in a way that allows you to feel freer. That's sort of what I was thinking. Trish had an amazing sort of way to explain it as well, so I'd love to hear from her.
Yeah, thank you, Joey. I think if I add anything, I'll be reiterating what's been said. For me, the power analysis piece is significant too. So what is my place of power? What is the place of other powers? And so I'm thinking about, you know, what is the story of a trans youth in a heteronormative, binaried community? What is that story? That's a story about a whole set of realities and systems and power dynamics. And that will get told in the story, and the story that will get told is not going to end with something being wrong with that person, right? And I think that that's what any sort of trauma-based relational critical work offers, is there's nothing wrong with me kind of place of resolution.
Thanks. I really appreciate the clarification. That's really helpful. And just a really fantastic discussion today, both, you know, with people unmuting themselves and sharing verbally, but also fantastic comments in the chat. So just being mindful of the time, I'm almost sorry to wrap this up because I feel like I could listen to this for forever. But I think we will wrap it up, and I'll turn it over to Barb just for the last few minutes, and then we'll say goodbye for today.
And just to, honestly, like this just feels like such a neat opening of a very important conversation. I mean, the threads of, you know, the safe spaces is sort of where we started, but related to sharing, related to building trust, related to not rushing, related to clear purpose about this isn't about psychotherapy, etc. I mean, these are really important aspects of safe spaces. And another theme I thought was intriguing that actually relates to pandemic adaptations too is the individual stories in relation to the context, the system context. And so that's another sort of critical lens in bringing to the individual stories about the reflection of the systems, about the collective. And Andrea, your point, it was very clear. I think it was a really important one that you made in the chat there. So, I mean, and not fault finding. I mean, so important, everything that's been shared. And I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody for literally just opening this conversation. It seems like what might be a really neat step as we move towards shaping the first collective storytelling within the MHP-IF on the pandemic adaptations, that we'll commit to, you know, iterations with you on shaping that, et cetera. I mean, really important. I mean, the voices that we've heard here, you know, the experience of a couple of the Hub Resource Collaborative members, all the project voices, I mean, all important to sort of help co-design how we want to use this as a collective, and specifically in the first case for pandemic adaptation. So, I mean, congrats to everybody, and thank you for a really robust and healthy conversation about this. Where we wanted to end is, I promised that there would be a poll. I think, Annette, if we've still got time, maybe we'll just put that up. And the poll is about just to help shape the next monthly webinar, which is, we're thinking about just having some specific topics in small group discussions, like the breakout rooms in Zoom. And so the question that's posed is, for the August webinar, what topics would you be interested in discussing in breakout rooms? And you can choose more than one, but we just want to get a little bit of a feel for what might be of interest there. So we've got the experiences working with different populations. I mean, Indigenous populations, a refugee, immigrant, newcomer, and also LGBTQ2S+, ways to use the Hub's project management tool, strengthening project partnerships, who, when, how, why, and ways to build shared understandings of project vision, activities, core values, etc. So any other sort of top of mind thoughts that come to mind? And Annette, I'll let you cut off the poll and share the findings.
Oh, I think that just, sorry, and that was going to share, and then I don't know that I just accidentally reset that.
Oops.
I'm not sure, there was a little glitch there. Sorry, if everybody could just vote again quickly, that would be really much appreciated. I think there was a clear winner, which was the ways to build a shared understanding of project vision, activities, core values, etc.
Oh, okay.
Earlier, and now it looks, I apologize about that. I think I just kind of, I'm working on two computers, and I think my my dexterity isn't really where it should be for this kind of functioning. So apologies for that.
So maybe where it's at now, Annette, we need
Yeah.
to wrap up. Yeah.
There it is. Okay. So it looks like a three-way split. Experiences working with Indigenous populations was 7 out of 11 voters, as was strengthening project partnerships, who, when, how, why, and then that other one, the building a collective vision, shared vision. So those were the 3 top choices. Thanks very much for your inputs, and we'll take that into consideration as Barb mentioned for the August webinar.
Absolutely. And as other ideas come to you, I mean, this isn't a one-shot deal. I mean, please feel free to share ideas with us. And Joey, I'm seeing your comment in the chat. Thanks so much for listening to me ramble. Wasn't rambling at all. I think clearly there were some fantastic exchanges, and thanks again to everybody. And for those who are experiencing rain, well, stay inside. And for those who have brighter skies, enjoy outdoors. So thanks so much, everybody. And we'll sign off for today. Bye for now.
Everybody.